woman set up a camera at her husband's grave, but what she saw in the recording shocked her. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong after Mark's sudden death. At his funeral, she stood by his grave, lost in grief. But days later, strange things began happening. The soil looked disturbed, and flowers moved without reason. Desperate for answers, Sarah hid a camera near the grave. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual. Then, shadows appeared, and one night, a faint handprint formed on the headstone before vanishing. Sarah's grief turned into obsession. She searched through Mark's belongings and found receipts leading to an old cottage at the edge of town, a place connected to a secretive group. Determined, she went there hoping for answers, but what she saw there shocked her. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. The directions from the receipts she had found in Mark's drawer had led her down a narrow country road on the outskirts of town. The further she drove, the more the world around her seemed to vanish. Street lamps grew scarce, trees pressed in close, and the sound of her own breathing seemed louder in the silence of the night. Finally, she stopped. At the end of the lane stood a cottage. Its windows were cracked. The paint on the door had peeled away, and the roof sagged like it had been left to rot for years. A cold wind blew through the air, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. She sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the place. Part of her wanted to turn back, to forget the receipts and the grave, to leave everything buried. But another part of her couldn't. She needed answers. With a deep breath, she stepped out and pushed the door open. The hinges screeched, and the sound echoed through the still night. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor groaned with every step. She lifted her torch and aimed it across the walls. Strange markings had been carved into the plaster, symbols she didn't recognize, looping and curling in unnatural shapes. Melted candles stood in a ring on the floor, their wax hardened long ago, as if whatever had happened here had ended suddenly and without warning. Her throat tightened. What was Mark doing connected to this place? She moved deeper into the room and spotted a pile of yellowed papers on a wooden table in the corner. She brushed away the dust and began to flip through them. At first they seemed meaningless, old bills, notes scribbled in a rushed hand. But then she froze. One page stood out. Her name was written across the top in Mark's handwriting. But as she read on, her stomach sank. It wasn't a letter to her, it was notes about her. Notes she didn't understand. He had been writing about secrets, about visits to this house, about people she didn't know. Her torch flickered, and for a moment she thought she heard something. A shuffle, faint but real, behind her. She turned quickly, her chest pounding. The doorway was darker than before, the night pressing in like a shadow given form. She took a step back, her hands trembling, the papers still in her grip. Then a figure appeared. A man stepped into the weak beam of the torch. His skin was pale, his hair untidy, his eyes red as if from sleepless nights. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew him. It was Daniel, Mark's old friend from years ago. She had met him once briefly, before he moved away. He had been close to Mark in college, before life had taken them down different paths. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel lowered his gaze, guilt written across his face. "I didn't mean for you to find me here," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence like a crack in glass. Sarah's heart raced. The images from the camera flooded back into her mind. The shadows, the soil disturbed, the flowers moving. It was him. He had been the one at Mark's grave. The handprint, the shifting earth, the things that had kept her awake night after night. It hadn't been a ghost or some force from beyond. It had been Daniel. Why? She whispered, her throat dry. He didn't answer at first. He stepped closer, his shoes crunching on broken plaster, and when he finally spoke, his words were heavy. "Mark reached out to me," he said, "not long before he died. He came here to this house. He was looking for something. Something he wouldn't talk about even to me. He said it was important. He said it was dangerous." Daniel's voice cracked as he continued. "When he died, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't let it go. I kept coming back here, and I kept going to his grave. It was the only way I felt close to him." Sarah's chest tightened with anger and confusion. She thought of all the nights she had sat awake, wondering if her husband was trying to reach her from beyond the grave, only to discover it was this man, this old friend. who had never let go. "You scared me," she said, her voice shaking. "You made me believe." Her words trailed off, unable to leave her lips. Daniel lowered his head. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I couldn't stop myself." Mark was searching for something, and I don't think he ever found it. I wanted to understand. I wanted to finish what he started. The torchlight flickered across the wall again, casting the strange symbols into view. Sarah clutched the papers tighter in her hand. "What is this place?" she asked. Daniel glanced around the room. "I don't know for sure," he admitted. "There were rumors in college. Mark told me once about a group that met in places like this. They believed they could find answers in old symbols, in rituals long forgotten. I thought it was just stories, but when he reached out when he came here before he died, I realized he had been serious. I don't know what he found. Maybe nothing. Maybe too much." The silence between them grew heavy. Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. She had chased shadows for weeks, believing her husband's death had left behind some impossible mystery. And now she stood in a crumbling house with nothing but scraps of paper and the confession of a broken man. Her anger faded, replaced by exhaustion. "So all of this," she whispered. "The grave, the camera, the handprint. It was just you." Daniel nodded slowly. His voice was barely audible. "It was just me. I didn't know how to let him go." Her heart ached. She wanted to scream, to demand answers. But what answers could he give? Mark was gone. The mystery she had built in her mind had no ghost, no hidden force, no final revelation. There was only grief, hers and Daniel's, twisted into something neither of them could control. For a long time they stood in silence, two people bound together by the loss of the same man. Finally, Sarah lowered the papers and let them fall to the floor. The dust rose up around them like smoke. She turned towards the door. Outside, the night air was cold, but it felt real in a way the house never could. She stood for a moment beneath the stars, breathing deeply, and realized that some questions would never be answered. Some secrets would never be revealed. Mark had lived a life she didn't fully know, and now it was over. No papers, no cameras, no hidden symbols could change that. Behind her, Daniel remained in the shadows, and she knew she would never see him again. As she walked back to her car, she felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, but she also felt a strange release. She had been chasing ghosts, but in the end there was only the reality of loss, and the ways people carried it differently. Sarah gripped the steering wheel once more, her eyes stinging with tears. She started the engine, and as the cottage disappeared in her rear-view mirror, she realized that some things are never meant to be fully understood. Old man bought a small stone cottage for $2,000, but what he found inside changed his life forever. Arthur always liked old places, so when he saw a tiny stone cottage for such a low price, he decided to buy it. The cottage looked abandoned. He planned to use it as a quiet weekend place. One evening, while walking through the hallway, he noticed a strange shape on the floor. Curious, he pulled back the worn carpet and saw a rusty hatch. His heart started beating faster. He bent down, forced it open, and slowly lifted it up. A cool breeze came from below. Inside was a narrow staircase going down into the dark. He stopped for a moment, holding his breath. Then he stepped inside to see where it led. What he saw left him speechless. Arthur's hand shook slightly as he gripped the torch and aimed it down the steep stone steps. The light cut through the darkness just enough to show the bottom, where a small wooden door stood waiting. The air was damp, and every breath he took carried the taste of earth and age. Slowly he made his way down, one careful step at a time, the torch beam trembling across the rough walls. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint echo of his footsteps. By the time he reached the door, his heart was pounding so loudly it felt like the whole cellar could hear it. He hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the old iron handle. The wood was dry and cracked, but it still held firm after all these years. With a slow breath, Arthur pulled the door open. The hinges squealed loudly, and the sound bounced off the stone walls like a warning. He lifted the torch, expecting to see nothing more than an empty cellar, but as the beam swept across the room, his jaw dropped. The chamber was much larger than he had imagined. Rows of shelves lined every wall, stretching from the damp stone floor to the ceiling. Each shelf was packed tight with objects covered in dust, some wrapped in faded cloth, others stacked carelessly on top of each other. The smell was strong now, a mix of old wood, rusted metal, and something faintly sweet, like paper left too long in the sun. Arthur stepped inside slowly, his torchlight revealing more of the strange collection. On the first shelf, he saw wooden boxes carved with strange designs. Some looked like symbols, others like letters from a language he didn't recognize. He brushed the dust off one and gently lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of yellowed letters tied together with string. The paper was brittle, and the ink had faded, but he could still make out names and dates. Some of them were over 100 years old. Arthur's mouth went dry. He realized he wasn't just looking at junk. This was history hidden beneath his cottage. He moved to the next shelf, where stacks of books leaned dangerously against one another. Their leather covers were cracked, their pages edged with gold. He picked one up and opened it carefully. Inside, the handwriting was neat and precise, written in a language he couldn't read. He closed it quickly, afraid the pages would crumble in his hands. He placed it back on the shelf, his torch beam moving slowly across the room. In the corner, something glinted. Arthur crouched down and pulled away a piece of cloth. Beneath it was a small chest, its metal edges rusted but still intact. He tugged at the latch, and with a bit of force, it popped open. Inside were silver coins, dull with age but still shining faintly in the light. His breath caught. He reached in and picked one up. The surface was stamped with a crest he had never seen before. It felt heavy in his palm, solid, real. He put it back and quickly closed the chest, his hands trembling. Arthur leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He had only bought the cottage for $2,000, thinking it was nothing more than a quiet retreat. Yet beneath its floor was a secret that could change everything. But he needed to be sure. He couldn't trust his own eyes. He had to know exactly what he was standing in the middle of. The next morning, Arthur drove into the nearest town. He asked around for someone who knew about old houses and antiques. Finally, he was given the name of a retired historian named Dr. Wilson, who lived just a few miles away. When Arthur explained what he had found, Wilson raised his eyebrows but agreed to come see it for himself. When they returned to the cottage, Arthur led him down the hatch and into the hidden chamber. As soon as Dr. Wilson's eyes adjusted to the dim torchlight, his mouth fell open. He walked slowly through the room, his fingers brushing lightly over the books and boxes. He bent down and opened one of the bundles of letters, scanning the faded ink. Then he turned to Arthur, his voice barely above a whisper. This is remarkable," he said. "Do you realize what you found?" Arthur shook his head. "I thought it was just an old storage room. I don't know what any of this is." Dr. Wilson picked up one of the books and carefully opened it. His eyes widened. "This is from the 18th century, handwritten. Do you see this signature here?" This was a well-known local scholar. Some of his work was thought to be lost forever. And these coins, he crouched by the chest, lifting one gently. These could be from the early 1800s, possibly even earlier. The entire room is like a time capsule. Arthur felt his knees weaken. He had known it was something unusual, but hearing the historian confirm it made his head spin. "So, are they worth anything?" Dr. Wilson gave him a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "Worth any? Arthur, this collection could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more depending on what else is here. Some of these manuscripts might be unique, the only ones of their kind left in existence." Arthur swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a shelf to steady himself. He had never expected this. He thought he had bought an old abandoned cottage. Instead, he had stumbled upon a treasure trove, hidden beneath his feet. Over the next few weeks, word began to spread. More experts came to the cottage, each one leaving more astonished than the last. Archivists carefully documented the letters, reading names and dates that told stories of families long gone. Scholars examined the books, some of which were so rare that museums sent representatives to make offers. Collectors came forward, eager to buy the coins, the manuscripts, even the carved boxes that held them. Each time someone gave Arthur a number, he felt his chest tighten. The value of the collection climbed higher and higher, until finally, one appraisal estimated the entire find at over. Arthur sat in his kitchen that night, staring at the hatch in the floor, barely able to believe his luck. He had paid just $2,000 for the cottage, and now he was sitting on something that could change his life forever. But money wasn't the only thing on his mind. As he walked through the hidden room at night, torch in hand, he felt something deeper. These weren't just objects to be sold. They were pieces of history. Every book, every letter, every coin had once belonged to someone. They were fragments of lives long past, and Arthur felt a strange responsibility to protect them. So he made a decision. He would sell enough to secure his future and renovate the cottage. But he would keep the most important pieces safe. He worked with museums to loan out manuscripts for exhibitions. He allowed historians to study the letters, piecing together stories that had been hidden for centuries. And he kept the chest of coins locked away, a reminder of the day his life changed forever. The cottage, once broken and forgotten, became warm and welcoming. Arthur restored the stone walls, repaired the roof, and filled it with light. On weekends he sat in the little living room with a cup of tea, knowing that beneath his feet lay the secret that had transformed his life. What began as a simple purchase for peace and quiet had given him something far greater, a chance to hold history in his hands. And as he looked out at the countryside, the torchlight from the hatch faintly glowing below, Arthur knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden where no one expects them. A school caretaker found a giant hole in the football pitch one morning, and when he looked inside, he had to call the police right away. It happened at Greenfield Academy in Cornwall, England. Caretaker John Riley was doing his early morning check of the grounds when he noticed something strange near the center circle. The grass had collapsed overnight, leaving behind a huge crater almost 15 feet wide. John froze for a moment, staring at the dark pit. It looked bottomless. He rushed to grab a heavy-duty torch from the storage shed and shone the beam into the hole. But no matter how hard he tried, the light couldn't reach the bottom. Without wasting time, he phoned the authorities. Within minutes, police cars and emergency vans surrounded the school field. A rope team was quickly set up. One officer clipped himself into the harness and began lowering down carefully. But as soon as his torchlight swept across what was hidden beneath the football pitch, he panicked. He scrambled back up as fast as he could, gasping into his radio and demanding urgent backup. The authorities didn't waste time. Within minutes of caretaker John Riley's urgent call, the school football field was cordoned off with tape and floodlights brought in to illuminate the gaping crater. What had once been the center circle was now a cavernous opening stretching wide, the jagged edges of turf hanging loosely like torn fabric. Teachers arriving early for the day stood at the fence in disbelief, whispering to one another, while police radios crackled with tense orders. A specialist response team had been summoned from the city, equipped with climbing gear and ground stability equipment. The sheer size of the hole had made it clear this wasn't an ordinary sinkhole. John, standing to the side with his arms crossed tightly, felt both anxious and curious as he watched the professionals prepare. One officer clipped into the ropes, adjusted his helmet, and began the careful descent. The beam of his torch cut through the darkness, bouncing off the uneven earth walls. John held his breath, trying to follow the officer's movements, though soon the light disappeared deeper and deeper into the void. A silence hung over the pitch, broken only by the sound of rope sliding through gloved hands. Then a sudden shout echoed from below. The officer's voice was sharp and shaken, calling for an immediate pull-up. The crew reacted instantly, hauling him back up at speed. As soon as his feet hit solid ground again, he ripped off his helmet, his face pale. He whispered something urgently into the commanding officer's ear, and within minutes, phones were out, more calls being made. Whatever he had seen was serious. By mid-morning, additional units had arrived. This time, it wasn't just local police, but also investigators in plain clothing who carried themselves with authority. They conferred quietly, then directed the rope team to prepare for a deeper exploration. John watched, his stomach twisting. The men moved with precision, carrying scanning equipment, oxygen monitors, and heavy-duty torches. When two of them finally descended, the crowd held its breath again. For several long minutes, there was nothing but muffled echoes and the occasional flicker of light against the jagged wall. Then a voice rose clearly over the radios. "It's man-made." That single phrase sent a ripple of shock through everyone on the surface. The team below reported that they had reached a tunnel, not a natural cave, but a carefully constructed passageway with bricked walls and rusted metal supports. The further they went, the more evidence of deliberate engineering emerged. There were remains of old wooden planks, scraps of decayed rope, and even ventilation shafts rising upwards to the surface. The officers described tracks carved into the ground, as though carts or wheelbarrows had once been used to move items through. John felt his mouth go dry. He had thought he was dealing with a collapsed sinkhole caused by heavy rain, but this was something else entirely. This was a hidden structure buried directly under a school's football field. The discovery sent officials into overdrive. The site was secured completely, with the school evacuated and children sent home. The head teacher, pale and shaken, asked John if he had noticed anything unusual in recent weeks. He shook his head, insisting that apart from the sudden collapse, the pitch had always seemed perfectly normal. But as news spread quickly through the small Cornwall town, rumors began to swirl. Some whispered it was an old wartime shelter, built secretly during the Second World War and forgot. Others speculated it could have been part of a smuggling route, given Cornwall's history of hidden passages and contraband running along its coasts. By late afternoon, federal-level experts joined the investigation. Wearing helmets fitted with cameras, they descended the ropes and pushed deeper into the tunnel system. What they filmed confirmed the wildest suspicions. The tunnel stretched far beyond the football pitch, extending hundreds of meters underground. Its walls, though cracked and crumbling in places, were reinforced with stone and mortar. Old iron brackets jutted out, supporting beams that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. Along one section, investigators discovered the remains of old railway tracks, thin, rusted rails suggesting that small carts had once transported heavy loads through the darkness. The deeper they explored, the stranger the findings became. In one chamber, the walls bore faded markings, crude symbols carved into the stone, their meaning unclear. In another section, a pile of wooden crates lay half-buried under collapsed soil. When carefully pried open, the crates revealed nothing but empty glass bottles and scraps of canvas. Yet their organized stacking suggested they had once stored something more significant. What unsettled investigators most, however, was the ventilation system. Long, rusting pipes stretched upward toward the surface, indicating that whoever built this network had intended it to last. This was not a hastily dug hideaway, but a complex design built with serious purpose. John stood among the growing crowd of onlookers behind the cordon, struggling to believe what was happening beneath the ground he had walked daily for years. He thought of the children who had played football above without realizing that just beneath their feet lay a forgotten world. The police worked quickly, tracing maps, attempting to determine where the tunnel led. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in, scanning outward from the school. The results stunned them. The tunnel stretched toward the outskirts of town, its endpoint unclear but pointing toward the coast. This discovery shifted the theories from simple wartime relics to organized smuggling, possibly tied to Cornwall's long history of illicit trade. As night fell, the operation continued under floodlights. More specialists were lowered down, documenting every meter of the passage. They reported areas where the ceiling had partially collapsed, likely caused by recent heavy rains that had weakened the old support. In those sections, the ground above had given way, forming the sinkhole John first discovered. In other parts, however, the construction was still remarkably intact. Officials speculated that the tunnel had been abandoned decades earlier, possibly after a crackdown made smuggling routes too dangerous to maintain. Still, the precision of the design left no doubt about its original purpose. This had been a major operation. By the second day, the scale of the discovery was clear. Maps revealed the tunnel stretched nearly 2 miles underground, with multiple offshoots branching in different directions. Some of these ended abruptly in collapsed soil, while others appeared to lead toward farmhouses, barns, and even an abandoned stone cottage on the edge of the cliffs. When teams finally reached the coastal end, they found a bricked-over exit hidden among tangled ivy and overgrown hedges. The bricks were weathered but strong, suggesting someone had deliberately sealed the tunnel decades ago. It was a chilling thought, a secret route that once moved goods, or perhaps people lying dormant all this time beneath a quiet Cornish town. For John, the experience was surreal. What had begun as an ordinary morning check of the school grounds had escalated into one of the largest discoveries the area had ever seen. Reporters swarmed the gates, demanding interviews, while police issued tight-lipped statements confirming only that an extensive underground structure of historical and criminal interest had been found. Though no arrests could be made, as those who built it were long gone, the discovery provided valuable knowledge for authorities studying Cornwall's smuggling history. For the town itself, it was a reminder that beneath even the most ordinary places, secrets sometimes sleep in silence, waiting for the ground to give way. Flowers vanished from the daughter's grave, so the mother hid a camera, but what she discovered was shocking. Daniel and Claire Whitmore lived in Cornwall, England, with their 2 children. When Claire became pregnant with their 3rd child, the family was thrilled, but their joy turned to sorrow when their baby girl Lily passed away shortly after birth. They gave her a peaceful resting place marked with a white headstone and a small angel carving. They often visited, bringing flowers, soft toys, and letting their other children feel Lily was still part of the family. But then something strange began to happen. The flowers and toys they placed kept disappearing. Daniel first assumed it could be foxes or perhaps rules at the cemetery, but the same thing happened over and over. So Daniel decided to set up his camera inside a painted birdhouse and tucked it behind the grave. Then they waited. A week later, Daniel reviewed the footage. What he saw left him speechless. The flowers on their daughter's grave kept disappearing, so Daniel and Claire Whitmore finally hid a camera. What they saw would change everything. The couple lived quietly in Cornwall, England, raising their 2 children. When Claire became pregnant with their 3rd child, the entire family was filled with joy. They made plans, decorated a small room, and spoke often about the future. But their joy turned into heartbreak when the baby girl Lily died during childbirth. The grief was heavy, but they gave her a dignified burial. At the small countryside cemetery, they placed a white stone engraved with her name and an angel carving to watch over her. Every week they visited. They brought fresh flowers, small toys, and sometimes letters written by the children, so their little sister would never be forgotten. It became a family ritual. Even in death, Lily was still part of their lives. But then, something unsettling happened. On one visit, the toys were missing. At first, Daniel thought perhaps foxes or birds had carried them off. Another time, it was the flowers that were gone. He wondered if perhaps the cemetery had strict rules about what could be left at the graves. Yet when he asked, the caretaker told him no such rules existed. Still, every time they came, the same thing happened. Fresh flowers one day, gone the next. Toys left behind, vanished without a trace. It continued for weeks, until frustration finally gave way to suspicion. There were no cameras in the cemetery. Nobody seemed to know who could be taking the things. So Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands. He bought a small camera, painted it to look like a simple birdhouse, and placed it in the hedges behind Lily's grave. He made sure it was hidden from sight, then left the cemetery with Claire, both of them carrying heavy hearts. A week later, Daniel sat down in the living room with Claire by his side. He pressed play on the footage. For a long time, the video showed nothing, just the quiet graveyard, trees swaying in the wind, and the occasional bird passing by. Daniel was about to turn it off when a flicker of movement caught his eye. He leaned closer. Out of the shadows walked a group of children. Not adults, not teenagers. Children. They looked thin, their clothes worn and dirty. Some of them had shoes falling apart. Others walked barefoot over the damp grass. Daniel and Claire watched silently, their breath caught in their throats. A young boy knelt at Lily's grave. He picked up the flowers gently, almost carefully, as though he understood they meant something. A girl reached down and lifted one of the toys. None of them smiled. None of them laughed. Their faces were tired, almost sad, as though even the joy of holding a toy couldn't hide the emptiness in their lives. Claire's hand trembled. "They're just children," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Daniel paused the video, his anger fading into something else, an ache deep in his chest. These weren't vandals. They weren't thieves looking to cause harm. They were children with nowhere to go, scavenging for anything that might make their days a little bright. The toys weren't trophies. They were comfort. The flowers weren't trash. They were beauty in a life where beauty was scarce. Claire wiped her eyes, her voice barely a murmur. "They have nothing." Daniel nodded slowly, staring at the frozen image of the little boy clutching the flowers. For days, the couple couldn't stop thinking about them. Who were these children? Where did they sleep at night? How many more were out there? Calling the police didn't feel right. It wasn't a crime to want warmth, food, or hope. Punishment wasn't the answer. Something else was. The next week, Daniel and Claire returned to the cemetery, but this time, they didn't just bring flowers for Lily. They brought bags filled with sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of water. They carried bundles of warm clothing, scarves, and small blankets. They placed everything near Lily's grave, in the same spot where the toys had been. Daniel's voice was quiet as he arranged the things neatly. "If they come back," he said, "they'll see this." Claire touched the headstone and whispered to her daughter, "This is for you, Lily. In your name, we're going to help them." When they returned a few days later, the food and clothes were gone, but something else was waiting. Resting on the grave was a scrap of paper, folded neatly. Claire picked it up and unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside, written in small, uneven letters, were two simple words, "Thank you." She pressed it against her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks. "It's like she's smiling," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel put his arm around her, holding her close. From that day on, their visits changed. Each week, they brought fresh flowers for Lily, toys for the children, and bags filled with food and clothing. Sometimes, little notes were left behind. Other times, nothing at all. But Daniel and Claire knew the children had been there, and each time, their hearts felt lighter. They had found a way to honor their daughter, not just through grief, but through kindness. Over time, word spread quietly among the locals. A few neighbors began adding their own items to the collection. More food, more clothes, sometimes even small books and blankets. What began as an act of sorrow slowly turned into a circle of care. The memory of one lost child gave hope to many living ones. For Daniel and Claire, it didn't erase the pain of losing Lily. That grief would always remain. But something else grew alongside it: purpose. Every time they knelt by the grave and laid down gifts, they felt their daughter's spirit close, as though she had guided them to this act of love. The cemetery was no longer just a place of sadness. It became a place of quiet hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion can take root. The children were no longer faceless shadows on a screen. They were real, and they mattered. And Daniel and Claire knew they would keep helping them, week after week, for as long as it was needed. Because sometimes the smallest gestures, flowers, toys, a loaf of bread, can carry the greatest meaning. And in giving, they discovered something no camera could ever capture: that love, even after loss, never truly disappears. A mother slipped a tiny camera into her son's backpack when he suddenly refused to go to school, but what it captured left her stunned. Daniel had always loved school, coming home every day with stories and laughter. But after moving to a new school called Westbrook Academy, everything changed. He became quiet, avoided eye contact, and started making excuses to stay home. When the school explained that it was just a big adjustment and that his new teacher had a naturally loud voice, his mother Claire wasn't convinced. Daniel's spark was fading more each day. One morning, Claire tucked a small recording device deep inside his backpack. Daniel didn't know it was there. When he came home that afternoon, she unzipped the bag, pulled out the device, and hit play. What she heard made her heart stop. Claire sat at the kitchen table after midnight, staring at the little recorder as if it might speak again on its own. The tea beside her had gone cold. The house was quiet in that way that makes every small sound feel loud. The boiler clicked. The fridge hummed. A fox barked somewhere down the street. Michael sat opposite her with his hands around his mug even though he wasn't drinking. Between them lay the device that had turned their whole week upside down. Claire pressed play again. At first, it was harmless. Chairs scraping, children chattering, the pencil rolling on the floor. Daniel's soft voice saying, "Yes, miss," and "Sorry, miss." Then the teacher's voice cut through too slow. "Are you deaf? Shut up. That's common sense." It wasn't firm, it was cruel. The kind of tone that makes your shoulders rise by themselves, like you can hide your neck from it. Claire pushed the recorder away as if it burned. Michael finally spoke, his voice low. "We can't send him back into that. Not another day." Claire nodded. She felt anger, but also guilt. She'd told herself he just needed time. New school, new routines. But while they asked him to be brave, he had been sitting in that classroom shrinking. They checked on Daniel. He was asleep, hair messy on the pillow. Toy cars lined neatly under the radiator. He still looked so small. Claire pulled his duvet to his shoulder and lingered there too long. Neither of them slept much. Claire lay awake, picturing the school office, the head teacher's face, the teacher's voice. Her heart beat like a drum. At 6, the alarm went off. The pavements were wet from rain. Daniel padded into the kitchen in his socks, glanced at the cereal box, then at his mother. "Do I have to go today, Mom?" Claire crouched eye level. "We're sorting it, love. You're not going back in there today." Michael called in to work. Claire did the same. They ate breakfast quietly. Daniel's eyes darting toward the school bag in the corner. Claire reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We've got you." By 9, they were at Westbrook Academy, an old red brick building, with a new glass entrance that didn't quite match. The receptionist smiled nervously as Claire asked to see the head teacher. Mr. Bryant, carrying a file under his arm, greeted them with that careful school voice that never sounds natural. Claire told him everything. The change in Daniel, the tears, the record. Her throat went dry as she set the device on the desk. He looked at it like it was a beetle. "I must make you aware that we cannot accept covert recordings as evidence. It's against policy. So you won't listen? Not even to check?" Claire's face flushed hot. "I'm not dismissing your concerns," he said. "But there is a process. We can move Daniel to another class while we arrange observations." Michael leaned forward. "Who will observe? When? What happens in the meantime?" "Within the fortnight," Mr. Bryant promised, repeating words like procedure and policy. Claire imagined 2 more weeks of Daniel begging not to go, and felt something harden inside her. They left with a promise. Daniel would switch classes that afternoon. In the car, Claire stared out of the window. "I know it helps him," she said softly, "but it doesn't help the ones still in there." That morning they took Daniel to the park instead. He ran, climbed, slid, until his cheeks glowed pink. He smiled at Claire for the first time in days. She tucked that smile into her heart like treasure. At home, when Daniel was drawing, Claire opened her laptop. She wrote a post in the parents group. No names, no recording, just the truth. A teacher whose voice made children shrink. A child who begged not to go. Within minutes, replies came. Parents admitting their children had cried before school. Feigned stomach aches, whispered at home. Some had moved schools entirely. By lunchtime, a petition was live. Dozens signed. Then hundreds. That afternoon, Daniel met his new teacher. The classroom was bright, filled with books and color. The teacher crouched to his level, speaking warmly, showing him where the space books lived. For the first time, his shoulders eased. That night, he laughed about a boy slipping on the park slide. At dinner, Michael poured drinks like it was a celebration. But later, as the house grew quiet, Claire still thought of the other children in that room. Over the week, messages poured in. One parent said their child chewed their cheek until it bled. Another said her daughter whispered even at home. By Friday, 2,000 signatures filled the petition. Claire was asked to speak at the board meeting. The hall was packed. Parents on one side, teachers on the other. Claire's hands shook as she stood. "Our child begged not to go to school," she said plainly. "He's better now, but children are still in that room." Some parents cried, but when the board spoke, the verdict was crushing. The teacher would not be dismissed, only coached. A note added to her file. Walking home, Michael put his arm around Claire. She bit back tears, unsure if it was the decision or the kindness of a stranger letting them cross the road. But Daniel came home with a drawing of the solar system. His new teacher laughed with the class, gave out rocket stickers. He laughed at his own jokes again. Slowly, his light returned. Weeks passed. He hummed brushing his teeth, laid out his uniform himself, even asked to bring books to school. Claire answered parent messages late at night, offering simple words, "You're not alone, you deserve better." Mr. Bryant later confirmed outside advisors would observe lessons. Training would follow. Claire nodded politely, but knew trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. Ordinary life crept back in. Pasta at dinner, football in the park, a hug at the school gate. So fierce it nearly knocked her over. Claire treasured each piece of normality. When Daniel whispered one evening, when she shouted, "My stomach hurt," I tried to be small. Claire held him close. "You never need to be small for anyone," she said. The petition made the local paper. The school replied with standard lines. Claire ignored the noise online, packing Daniel's lunch instead, tucking in a note, "You've got this." Months later, Daniel laughed louder, built rockets from Lego, got icing on his jumper at a birthday party, sometimes passing the old classroom. He squeezed Claire's hand tighter. She never told him to be brave. She just said, "I'm." One rainy morning, Claire stood under an umbrella at the school gate. The teacher walked past, stiff and silent. Claire looked up at the window of Daniel's new classroom and saw him bent over his work, safe. That night at dinner, he told them Jupiter had storms that lasted centuries, called the Great Red Spot. "Beautiful and dangerous," he said. Michael smiled. "Sounds like life." When Claire lay in bed, she didn't picture the recorder anymore. She pictured Daniel's grin, his shoulders steady, his arms flung wide in sleep like a starfish. They hadn't won everything, but Daniel was safe, and after everything, safe felt like a gift. Girl never let anyone into her room for months. Father froze when he discovered what she was hiding. It all began when 14-year-old Sophie, usually cheerful and talkative, suddenly became secretive. She started spending every afternoon in her bedroom with the door locked. Her dad, Mark, noticed unusual noises coming from the room late at night. When he asked, Sophie brushed him off with excuses that didn't add up. Even the next-door neighbor mentioned hearing odd sounds. Then one evening, a patrol car pulled up outside. Someone had called the police after hearing what they thought was a scream. Mark told them it was just a fox in the garden, but inside he knew something was wrong. The next morning, he called Sophie into the living room and demanded the key. What Sophie did left him speechless. Sophie stood in the middle of the living room, her hands gripping the chain around her neck where the small brass key hung. Her dad, Mark, waited, arms folded tightly across his chest, the tension in the room almost too much to bear. She looked pale, her eyes darting towards the stairs as though she was hoping for a way out. "What's in your room, Sophie?" he asked again, his voice calm but firm. She didn't answer right away. Her lips quivered, and she took a deep, shaky breath before whispering, "You need to see it for yourself." Mark held out his hand, and Sophie reluctantly placed the key in his palm. Together, they climbed the stair. Each step seemed louder than usual, creaking under the weight of what neither of them had yet said aloud. At her bedroom door, Mark slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff click. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The smell hit him first, a strange mix of damp earth and something musky. Clothes were strewn across the floor, some torn, some bunched into messy piles. A half-empty plate sat on the desk, crumbs scattered everywhere. Something had clearly been moving about in here. His eyes scanned the room and then he froze. Perched high on the top of her wardrobe was a large fox, its reddish fur bristling under the dim light. Mark's jaw dropped. Before he could say anything, the fox leapt down, landing with a thud on the bed. It darted to the corner, knocking over a lamp in its haste. Sophie stepped in quickly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "It's all right, Ember. It's just Dad." The fox's ears twitched, its golden eyes fixed on Mark, muscles tense as if ready to bolt. Sophie explained in a rush. She had found Ember as a tiny cub while walking home from school months ago. It had been raining and the fox was alone at the edge of a ditch. Shivering, she had waited for over an hour, hoping the mother would return, but no one came. "I couldn't leave her there," Sophie said soft. "She would have died." At first, Ember had been small enough to hide easily. Sophie made her a little den from blankets in the back of her wardrobe, feeding her bits of cooked chicken when no one was looking. She kept the door locked so nobody would find out. But as the fox grew, it became harder to keep the secret. The noises, the smell, even Sophie knew it was only a matter of time before someone asked questions. Mark rubbed his forehead, torn between anger, disbelief, and an odd flicker of pride at his daughter's compassion. "You've got a good heart," he said, his voice quiet now. "But this isn't safe. She's a wild animal." Sophie nodded, her eyes glassy. She knew what was coming. Later that afternoon, Mark called an old friend named Carla, who ran a local wildlife rescue. She arrived with a soft transport crate and spoke gently to Sophie, explaining that Ember could live in a protected enclosure where she'd be safe and cared for. Sophie's only condition was that she could see where Ember would live before agreeing. At the rescue center, Carla led them to a spacious, grassy pen with small trees and a wooden shelter. Sophie opened the crate, and Ember stepped out cautiously, sniffing the air. Then, with a flick of her tail, she trotted to the far side and leapt onto a log. The wind ruffled her fur, and for the first time, Sophie saw her truly relaxed. They visited every week after that. Each time, Ember would come running to the fence, tail swishing, her eyes bright. Sophie missed having her close, but she knew it was the right choice. Ember had a safe home now, and Sophie had learned that love sometimes means letting go. This photo of a couple about to get married would go viral. Army Sergeant Daniel Cross and his bride-to-be Hannah had no idea their wedding day would make headlines online. On that day, a photo was taken showing the couple holding hands but not looking at each other. Hannah's eyes looked teary, and she seemed emotional. People online started asking questions. Did the groom change his mind? Did he tell her something shocking right before the ceremony? The truth was nothing like the rumors, and when people finally learned what was really happening in that moment, it left them speechless. The truth behind that viral photo was nothing like the rumors. On the morning of their wedding, Sergeant Daniel Cross was feeling more than just excitement. He was nervous, not about marrying Hannah, but about making sure the day was as meaningful as it could be. He had spent months planning every detail, from the vows to the music, but there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about: how to start their marriage in the right way. Hannah, in another room, was also feeling the weight of the day. She had dreamed of this moment since she was young. The white dress, the flowers, the family gathered, but underneath the joy was a quiet sense of reality. Marriage wasn't just a celebration, it was a promise. That morning, Daniel made a special request to the wedding photographer and to the pastor. He asked if they could arrange a moment for him and Hannah to connect before the ceremony without seeing each other. It was important to him to honor a tradition he'd seen in his family, beginning a marriage with prayer. The photographer led Daniel to one side of a doorway, while Hannah stood on the other side. They could reach each other's hands, but not see each other's faces. The air was family members nearby held their breath. Hannah felt his hand slip into hers, warm, steady, and a little shaky. She could feel that he was as emotional as she was. She tried to imagine his expression, but she could only hear his breathing. Then Daniel began to speak. His voice was low and full of feeling. He thanked God for bringing Hannah into his life. He prayed for their marriage, that it would be filled with patience, understanding, and love, even through hard times. He prayed they would always put each other first, and that they would be strong enough to weather anything together. As he spoke, Hannah's eyes filled with tears. The world around them seemed to disappear. The sounds of guests talking, the music playing faintly in the background, even the clicking of the camera, all faded away. It was just them, holding hands, making a promise not only to each other but also before God. The photographer later said that in all his years capturing weddings, he had never seen such a raw, emotional moment before the ceremony. It wasn't staged, he explained. You could feel the love and the sincerity between them. I just happened to be there to witness. When the ceremony began, Daniel and Hannah saw each other for the first time that day. Both were smiling, but their eyes told the real story. They had already shared the most important moment hours earlier. Later, when the photographer posted the image online, it spread faster than anyone expected. People were drawn to the mystery of it. Two people holding hands, not looking at each other, one of them crying. The image sparked thousands of comments and shares. Some people guessed it was a goodbye. Others thought it was a fight, but when the real story came out that it was a prayer, it touched hearts around the world. Messages flooded in from couples saying they wanted to include a similar moment in their own wedding. Parents wrote in to say it reminded them of their own marriage vows. Hannah says that even now, years later, that moment still stands out more than anything else from their wedding day. It reminded us why we were there, she said. It wasn't just about the dress or the cake, it was about the promise we were making. Daniel agrees. That moment grounded us, he explained. When you start your marriage with faith, love, and humility, you're already giving it the best chance to last. The photo still circulates online from time to time, often shared by strangers who have no idea who the couple is. But for Daniel and Hannah, the memory is personal. It's the day they began their life together in the way they wanted, quietly, sincerely, and hand in hand. Grandson found out his grandma would get taken away, but what they did next was shocking. Ethan Pasquale lived in Arizona with his family, including his aging grandma, Rosa. She had been an elementary school teacher for over 20 years, but could no longer care for herself. The family had to choose between hiring a full-time caregiver or sending her to an assisted care home. Ethan was about to graduate from college, but when the decision came up, he did something no one expected. He offered to become her full-time caregiver. For months, he balanced his studies with looking after Rosa, making sure she was never alone. Then one day, in the middle of this new routine, Ethan tried something simple to share their moments together. He had no idea it would lead to something that would change both of their lives forever. The decision Ethan made changed everything. Life wasn't easy. He was in his last year of college, trying to finish assignments, attend lectures, and still give Rosa the care she needed. His friends invited him out, but most of the time he stayed home. If Rosa needed him, he was there. Each morning he woke early to make her breakfast. Some days Rosa was full of energy, talking about her years as a teacher. Other days, she was quiet, lost in thought. Ethan would sit beside her, listening to the same stories over and over. Stories about her pupils, their dreams, and the pride she felt when they succeeded. One afternoon, while helping her knit, Ethan pulled out his phone. "Mind if I record this?" he asked. She smiled. He posted a short clip of their conversation online. He didn't think much of it until the next morning, when it had thousands of views. Comments poured in from people saying the video reminded them of their own grandparent. Encouraged, Ethan began filming more moments. Rosa giving advice, telling old stories, and laughing at his jokes. The videos were simple but full of warmth, and they spread quickly. One clip, where Rosa shared her thoughts on kindness, reached hundreds of thousands of people. Soon, brands began reaching out with sponsorship offers for products Ethan genuinely used, from KitchenAids to comfortable clothes for Rosa. The extra income meant he could stop working part-time jobs and focus fully on caring for her. But what meant more than money was the impact on others. Messages arrived daily from viewers saying they had reconnected with their grandparents or started visiting them more often because of Ethan's videos. Rosa was touched. "Imagine," she told him, "at my age I'm still teaching, just in a different way." The two settled into a routine. Mornings were for breakfast and light exercise, afternoons for stories, evenings for quiet tea and music. Through it all, Ethan kept recording, not for fame, but to capture the moments that mattered most. Not every day was easy. Rosa's health had its ups and downs. There were hospital visits, sleepless nights, and times when Ethan felt completely drained. But whenever it was hard, he reminded himself why he chose this. Because Rosa had done the same for him when he was a boy. Years before, when his parents were busy working, Rosa stepped in. She made sure he was fed, helped with homework, and tucked him in at night. Now it was his turn to return that love. Looking back, Ethan says it was the best decision of his life. The videos might have brought them attention, but the real reward was the bond they shared and the time they spent together. Rosa often told him, "You don't measure life in years, you measure it in the love you give." And Ethan knew those words would stay with him forever. A girl bought an old cabin for only $900, But what she found inside shocked her. Amelia was 14 years old, full of curiosity, but in the summer she was bored. Unlike others, she wanted adventure. She saw an abandoned small cabin for sale for $900. It was broken down and almost forgotten, but she saw something in it. She bought it with the money she had saved by babysitting, washing cars, and helping neighbors. When she walked in, she had no idea what she would find. It was dark, dusty, and empty. People had once lived there. Old furniture, faded pictures, and broken chairs in the corners. Amelia decided not to just clean it. She would fix it. But as she worked, she noticed that one of the floorboards sounded hollow. Curious, she pulled it up. There was a small hole underneath. It led to a hidden space under the cabin. She climbed down and saw a large, dusty chest in the middle. It looked old, with rusty metal corners and a heavy lock. Amelia opened it, but what she saw inside was shocking. Months passed since Amelia found the chest in the hidden room beneath the old cabin. At first, she had only told her parents, and even they could hardly believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. The gold coins and bars were taken by experts, and soon everyone in town knew about her discovery. Newspapers wrote about her, and people she had never met before stopped her on the street, asking questions. Some praised her, others whispered with jealousy. Amelia tried her best to stay calm, but deep down, her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. Her parents explained that by law, much of the treasure belonged to the government. But Amelia would still get to keep a fair share since she had bought the property. For a girl who had only spent her summers babysitting and washing cars, it felt unreal. The money they received was enough to help fix their family home and even pay off debts that had weighed them down for years. Amelia felt proud, but she knew the story of the cabin wasn't finished yet. She couldn't stop thinking about that hidden room, about what else might still be down there, waiting to be discovered. One afternoon, Amelia returned to the cabin alone. She brought a torch, a notebook, and her determination. As she stepped inside, the smell of old wood and dust greeted her again. The place was quieter than ever, and she felt the floor creak beneath her steps. She looked at the loose board she had pulled up weeks ago. The hole still led down to the hidden space, but this time she noticed something she hadn't before. Along one of the stone walls beneath the cabin, there seemed to be a small crack that ran all the way from the floor to the ceiling. Her heart began to beat faster. Carefully, she placed her torch near the chest and knelt down. She touched the crack with her hand and felt a draft of cool air slipping through. It didn't make sense. If this space was sealed for so long, why would air be moving through? She pressed her ear to the wall and heard a faint hollow echo, as though another room was hiding behind it. The thought made her shiver, but curiosity was stronger than fear. Amelia went back home and returned the next day with a hammer and chisel she had borrowed from her father's shed. She knelt again by the wall and began carefully chipping away at the cracked stone. The sound echoed in the small space, dust filling the air, but she didn't stop. After nearly an hour of hard work, part of the wall gave way, and a hole wide enough for her to crawl through appeared. She pointed her torch inside and gasped. Behind the wall was another room, larger than the first. She squeezed through, her hands brushing against the rough stone as she entered. The air inside smelled damp and old. Her torchlight revealed shelves built into the walls, lined with objects covered in thick cobwebs. Old books with cracked leather covers, glass jars with faded labels, and wooden boxes stacked neatly, as if someone had left them there in a hurry. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the strange collection. One box was filled with rolled-up maps, some drawn by hand with markings she couldn't understand. Another shelf held dusty bottles that glimmered faintly when the light hit them. But what caught her attention most was a locked journal lying on top of a stack of books. Its cover was dark, made of leather, with strange initials carved into it. The lock was small, and with a little effort, Amelia managed to pry it open. Inside, the pages were filled with handwriting so old it was fading. She flipped carefully through the pages and realized it was a diary. The words told the story of a man who had lived in the cabin more than a century ago. He wrote about traveling across the sea, collecting gold and rare objects, and hiding them away. He mentioned dangers, secret deals, and people who might come looking for what he had stored. Amelia's hands trembled as she read. The chest she found was only part of something much bigger. She left the cabin that night with the diary tucked under her arm. For weeks, she spent her evenings reading through the old pages. Piece by piece, the man's story came alive. His name was Elias Thornton, and he was not just a traveler. He had been a smuggler, moving treasures and artifacts across countries, always staying one step ahead of the law. The gold she had found was only a portion of what he claimed to have hid. According to the diary, other hiding places existed, marked only on the secret maps he had left behind. Amelia felt torn. Part of her wanted to tell the authorities everything, but another part wanted to follow the clues herself. She was young, but her curiosity burned like fire. One map in particular caught her attention. It showed a mark in the woods not far from her town, near the riverbank. The diary entry beside it spoke of a chest buried where the roots drink deeply. The words stayed in her mind, and she couldn't ignore them. The next Saturday, she packed a small bag with water, a snack, and a spade. She followed the map through the winding trees until she reached the river. The sound of water rushing over rocks filled the air, and the sun shone through the leaves. She studied the map again and searched for a tree whose roots stretched into the earth beside the water. After some time, she found it, an old oak tree with thick, twisting roots that disappeared into the soil near the river's edge. Amelia dug carefully at the base of the tree, her heart pounding with each strike of the spade. The earth was firm, but after nearly half an hour, she struck something hard. She fell to her knees and brushed away the soil with her hands. A wooden lid appeared beneath the dirt. She pulled harder, and soon another chest emerged, smaller than the first but just as old. Her hands shook as she lifted it out of the ground. She opened it slowly, and inside she found not gold but artifacts. Old coins from different countries, a silver compass, a pocket watch still ticking faintly, and strange carved stones with symbols she had never seen before. She stared in wonder. These objects weren't as valuable as gold, but they felt even more mysterious, carrying stories from long ago. She remembered the words in the diary, "The treasure is not only wealth but knowledge." Now she understood what he meant. Amelia decided not to keep this discovery a secret. She brought the chest home and showed her parents. Together, they contacted a museum in the city. Historians came and were amazed by the objects. They explained that many of them came from different parts of the world and could help tell forgotten stories of history. Amelia was offered a reward for her honesty, and her name appeared in newspapers once again. This time not just as a girl who found gold, but as someone who had helped uncover pieces of history. Yet even with the praise and the rewards, Amelia's mind often wandered back to the hidden room beneath the cabin. The diary was not finished. There were more maps, more clues, and hints of treasures buried in places far away. She knew she couldn't search for them all, but the thought filled her with excitement. The old cabin had opened a door to a bigger world, one filled with secrets and adventures. At night, Amelia often sat in the restored cabin, reading the diary under the soft glow of a lamp. She felt connected to Elias Thornton, the man who had once hidden so much beneath those floors. His life had been dangerous, but through his words, she felt his hunger for discovery. She realized that her own journey had only just begun. The cabin was no longer just an abandoned place she bought for night. It had become the start of something far greater. Amelia had not only uncovered treasure, but also found courage, knowledge, and a passion for adventure. What began as a boring summer now felt like the beginning of a story that might last a lifetime. And though the chest of gold was gone, she still kept the diary close, knowing that somewhere out there, more secrets were waiting to be found.